unless you're dying, they won't even treat you. They won't give you any prophylactic, they won't give you any treatment at all until you have pneumonia. And then they'll treat the pneumonia or treat the lung infection. My friend had tubes in his chest and almost died just for being in the hospital, 70 years old. Just the lung infection, the COVID wasn't even the problem. But these people, like Lois said, were conditioned to think the hospital's going to help, the doctor's going to help, the ER's going to help. They're not designed to do that anymore. And we have prophylactics, treatments, we have that work, we have things that are scientifically validated or at least can be tried. We have to emphasize our own responsibility to do those things. That's really all I want to share. I don't want to beat up anybody else. I just want to say for me and mine, I better have a plan. And I want to encourage everyone else to do that too.
Grab this real quick.
All right, thank you. I think there may be a couple other people. Kirsten, I think. Can I call on you now?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm actually very, very nervous because I really don't like public speaking at all. And the last now almost 2 years have probably been the most painful 2 years of my entire life.
Sorry, we're sorry.
Maybe
We're
call
sorry.
somebody else first. Let me try to get it. I'm sorry.
You're doing good. You're doing great. You're doing good.
So, I was actually homeschooled, and the curriculum we used was Christian, and it taught me very explicitly about types of government. Like I had an entire year of government and economics. And one of the things that it really focused in on was communism. How to identify, a Marxist revolt and how horrible it really is to live under communism. And it was actually to the point where I would be reading my stuff and be like, okay, I get it, communism is bad. But in March of 2020, I was actually very thankful for my education. On top of being homeschooled, now when I introduce myself or when I think of myself, I would introduce myself as my name is Kirsten Hills. I am a non-essential human. I am somebody who is not needed in society, and I am somebody who is only wanted if the government gives its permission. Sorry. So, before COVID though, I was an educator. I did part-time work in social services. I actually did a lot of different types of part-time jobs because I was also a world traveler. I spent 2 years in the mission field where I taught at an international school in Ankara, Turkey. On top of that, I just traveled just because it was something that I loved. I really love meeting people. Before COVID, I had friends from all sorts of different backgrounds, political backgrounds, religious backgrounds, upbringing. I could make friends anywhere. There's a difference between vacationers and travelers. I was not a resort rat. I was the one with the backpack that stayed at, dodgy hotels and hostels and rode public transportation, and I met a lot of really amazing people. And I don't know, people just come and they talk to me and they share their stories with me and they tell me about their life experiences. And I had to travel a lot through former Nazi Germany and a lot through Eastern Europe. And so a lot of the things that people would talk about, life under communism, and the one thing that really stood out to me was this type of political theater, that you had your public appearance and you had your private appearance. And I think about that now with COVID, because I can't tell you how many people have come to me and say, I don't like wearing the mask, I don't agree with the mask. Why are you doing it? But life under communism, you did what you were told by the government, and if you didn't, you were a political enemy and you were going to face a lot of persecution. And that's the same type of thing as what we see now when you don't go along with the narrative. There's so many people that don't agree with the narrative, and they keep asking people, why are you complying? The other thing is that this hysteria, I had an ancestor who was one of the 19 women who was hung during the Salem witch trials. So it was another event that I really studied and did some traveling and explored some of those places. And I always wondered how people could follow along with this when it was like basically hysteria, right? You learn about the Salem witch trials, we think, why on earth did they think that all these people were possessed, and why is it that I could just accuse, Haley of being a witch, and Haley would clear herself from being a witch by saying, oh, I'm not the witch, David's the witch. And I mean, nonsensical, non-logical type of things, but we're seeing that now. When COVID happened originally, and everybody's like, you gotta stay 6 feet apart, and it seemed like I was the only one that asked questions, like why? What happens after 6 feet? Does the germ just drop? Does it, just magically disappear? Like, where does it go? And then just when this happened, March 16th was my birthday. I had just come back from my last trip to see my grandfather. Sorry. And I'm not 5. I don't need a birthday party. But what was really painful for me was that no one would be around me. I'm a single person, and before COVID and all of my social work and all of my training as an educator, we would talk about the importance of being with other people and the dangers of isolation. And all of a sudden, I was just expected to just sit by myself and be alone. When I would try to tell people, there were several people who told me, you should call a hotline. There's a hotline you could call so you can talk to someone. And the absurdity of I should call a hotline and talk to a complete stranger who is getting paid to talk to me and tell them that I'm sick because I'm alone. My so-called friends won't be around me because the government told them that I might give them COVID even though I have no symptoms and I'm not sick. Then I ended up working with John and Senator Reinbold. Actually, one of the Facebook groups up in Alaska probably because I felt so alone being the only one who seemed to question things. And it was just nice to finally be able to find other people who were also feeling that type of frustration. I also we had to do all of our meetings on Zoom, and I remember my principal had said something to me that really stood out to me, that she said we had to watch for parents to talk about depressed kids, because with the lockdown there was a rise of suicide and self-harm amongst both children and teenagers. This is a problem for me. I was somebody who wasn't afraid of COVID, so I was more than happy to have kids come and sit with me, and of course they're depressed, stop scaring them with the virus and let them go outside and ride bikes with their friends. But like John said, our First Amendment was completely just taken away from us, and Americans didn't even fight it. They just rolled over and said, okay, here you go. And so many people were even afraid to be out in public because there was the social distancing mandate in place, where if you read the language in it, the governor ordered Alaskans to stay in their home of residence, and if they had to leave, they had to maintain, the 6 feet apart, which again, I want to see the science behind this and know where the germs go. But then there was also this threat that if I was to leave my house and go to my parents' house, or even a friend's house, I could face a $25,000 fine or a year in jail in a free country. And I think John said with looking at the First Amendment, I was just really horrified because churches were closed. Where do you see that in a free country that you can't go and worship? And then, on top of hospitals for non-essential surgeries, and I don't know, I can't even think of all the mandates. If I had time to really think about them, I'm sure I could come up with them. But school ended that summer. I was able to get a doctor's note to be able to fly down to Washington because the mask gives me panic attacks. This was the last time I saw my grandfather. Sorry. My grandfather was a very special person. He died at the age of 95, and my grandfather, right up until about a couple months before he died, was still very, very, very sharp. And my cousins and I would all sit at his feet, and we would listen to him talk about World War II and surviving the war. And I thought how ironic it is that my grandfather, who fought so hard to maintain freedom, ended up dying at the hands of, not quite tyranny, but he died alone because the hospitals wouldn't allow they would allow a 30-minute end-of-life visit.
How big of them?
Yeah.
Evil.
So my grandfather's health, that was such a difficult summer. My grandfather's health was really starting to fail. And I was just like stressing, like in my heart, I knew that I wasn't going to probably have a job that following winter. And sure enough, end of July rolled around, and the state of Alaska, the administration, released the school reopening plan. That, for whatever reason, every single school district in the state decided to go along with, and they mandated masks for staff and students. It became this big 2-month process. In between that time, my grandfather's health was continuing to fail. My dad said they were looking at putting him in a nursing home, and I remember just sobbing. I said, "Don't do that. We'll never see him again." My dad, was like, I don't know what to do. What do we do? And then my grandmother ended up going in right at the beginning, I think, of August into hospice care. My grandmother was dying. She had a brain tumor. She knew she only had a couple months to live. She would cry. She would call my mom, my uncle, and just sob because she wanted her family there. And no one was allowed to go see her to protect her from COVID, even though she was dying at the age of 86. I did end up, I turned in my doctor's notes and everything, and then I was placed on leave of absence with the school district and told that I was a direct threat because I was not able to wear a mask. So I could harm, somebody by not wearing a mask. Again, there was no evidence to say that I would harm anybody. To this day, I still haven't had COVID, which again, we need to take a long look at the science because I put on about 60 pounds with all of the stress and anxiety, which is supposed to lower your immune system. I live in a constant state of anxiety. I frequently have panic attacks, which again is supposed to lower your immune system. I may never wear a mask. I'm not vaccinated, and I haven't had COVID. I haven't even had the flu. I've had a couple mild colds, and that's it. My grandfather ended up passing away. I think which makes this death so hard is that I always told myself that when my grandfather died, I'd be on the next flight out of Alaska, which I could have made it. It would have been, he would have passed away, and there's nothing I could do about it. But I had 2 days, and I could have made it on a flight out of Alaska, but I couldn't wear a mask. I couldn't drive out of state if I wanted to. I know I would have made it out in time. And then I could take the ferry out of state because, again, there was masking and COVID testing. So basically, like that feeling of just being a prisoner in my own state. And then my grandfather died, and then the month after that, my grandfather, who actually never ended up in the nursing home, was around his children, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren, his great-great-grandchildren who didn't wear a mask, and there was no vaccine at the time, and didn't die of COVID. But my grandmother, who was locked away in a nursing home and not allowed to see any of her family members, was supposedly died of COVID, but it happened around a time where she was basically to the point where her brain just wasn't functioning anymore and she could barely make sentences. And then, oh, grandma has COVID. Well, where did we see that before? Germany, people could send their kids away, people who were mentally handicapped, and then months later or weeks later, they would receive a letter in the mail saying that their loved ones had died. I ended up, I wasn't able to get a job back with the school district. My mortgage was in forbearance. Last year, I couldn't get a job anywhere because of mask hysteria, which was very frustrating for me because I've never had a problem having 2 jobs or 3 jobs simultaneously so I could afford my travels. I did start my own business, and then again, I got a job teaching at the McDonald's Center with a homeschool group, and I thought, okay, I'm gonna, get somewhere. And then the Anchorage Assembly decides that they're gonna have this big mask thing that goes on for weeks, and every single week I would go into Anchorage thinking this is my last week because I was told we have to follow the guidelines, and every single week I thought this is gonna be the last week that I'm gonna be able to teach. I ended up making it through the semester, but I had a lot of panic attacks. But then last October, I think another concerning thing was that my parents got COVID. And again, I don't understand why my elderly parents have COVID when they're not out and about as much as what I had, and I still have yet to have COVID. But they had COVID along with my mentally handicapped brother. My brother is not able to make informed medical decisions for himself. He has the mind of a child. He ended up being admitted into Matsu Regional, and the hospital denied my parents the opportunity to be able to go in and sit with him. After 36 hours, they still had not heard from a doctor and ended up going down to the hospital and refusing to leave until they met with the CEO. The CEO did actually supposedly admit that they had messed up, but then still didn't let my parents see him. And to this day, I swear it's just by the grace of God that my brother is still alive today, because so many people have been admitted to the hospitals and they've been given remdesivir and basically left to die. And I know that's not the case with every single person, but for my brother, who can't make informed medical decisions and will basically is very trusting and will go along with whatever, we are very, very lucky that he's still alive. John had asked me to just speak with what I had said to Governor Dunleavy, and I at first was not really wanting to go meet with Governor Dunleavy after all the pain that I've been through in the last year and a half, but I did it. And I just basically asked him about his mandates, and the only answer that I could get was, the expert said, the expert said, the expert said. And I don't understand how me, who has a basic high school, maybe one class in college, civics and government, could see this nightmare train happening from day one, and not a single leader could see what was happening in our country.
Right.
I know when I was working with John and finding the mandates and going over this stuff, and just kind of a lot of people that we would talk to would say, I don't even know what my rights are. And this may seem like something where you kind of want to roll your eyes, but at the same time I look at it that I'm like, wow, that's great. Because now we know what the problem is, and now we know what to fix. People don't know what their rights are. And part of that is because we have ventured away from what I would call common sense education. We've moved towards this thing where we just teach to a test, and we want to appease the federal government, and so in our schools we're just constantly focusing on the test. We don't focus on the important stuff. And one of the things that should be extremely important in our schools is to have a very in-depth civics education that is focused on the Constitution. The other thing that I did get out of Dunleavy was that he said, well, the mandates were not enforced.
Bullshit.
So I told him, then you don't put it in black and white. Because when you put it in black and white on paper, just because it is not being enforced, doesn't mean that it can't be enforced. And regardless of whether or not it was enforced or not, I had people, like I said, who were afraid to come around me because there was a social distancing mandate in place. I had a friend who honestly thought she couldn't leave her home in Sutton to go hiking on Hatcher Pass because there was a travel mandate in place. Now, people look to leadership, and you don't put policies in place, number one, if you're not willing to follow them, because I flat out told him nothing pissed me off more than when I was losing my job over a mask, and he would stand up every single day and say, just wear the mask. And then he shows up at the Trump rally in Big Lake not wearing a mask. I had a huge meltdown when I saw that I couldn't drive to Washington to be with my dying grandparents because that's non-essential travel. But Dr. Zink could tell border officials that she was furthering her children's education, and they could drive out of state and go travel around the country.
Right.
That it becomes this idea of do what I say, but not as I do. It's the same with, I think it was, is it Zach Fields? Is that his name?
Believe it or not, me.
Pinocchio.
He was one of them that wanted to make this like permanent mask law or something at one point in the state of Alaska, and yet he's down at the Capitol building partying up in Juneau without wearing a mask when I can't get a job because I can't wear a mask. So the hypocrisy that you see from leaders today is another huge problem, because our founding fathers didn't want that. They wanted a society where we were equal regardless of what your status was or as a politician. And they focused on how to make all of these like checks and balances and the separation of government, and there's this like big blurring that has been going on in our country, that you see the executive branch that's making mandates when it's not even their job.
That's right.
And so
absolutely
until we
right.
actually like fix the problem with understanding how our government works, and until people are actually willing to have the courage to step up and say, I'm not going along with this anymore.
Absolutely.
It doesn't have to be this thing where we go along with this war and we have a civil war and kill people. All you have to do is say no and refuse to follow them. And all you have to do is do the right thing.
Stand up.
If you're in a job where you're being asked to enforce mandates, all you have to do is say no. That's not my job. I'm not going to do it. And I'm not really sure why that's so scary for so many people. But I don't even know how to finish on like a happy note, so.
Alright, do we have anybody else that wants to share? And, oh, did you have something? I think we're still doing okay on time. Okay.
We have to do that?
Do you want, oh, that's
You
not
record
me.
it?
That's not me.
8:37. 8:37.
Okay, I apologize for maybe a little bit bull earlier. My whole life been involved in the military. My family history is in the military way, way back. And I've always been known as a door kicker, not a door knocker. So if it was a little bit out of line, I apologize for that. I was raised in a real small town, northern New York. Town so small we shared the same tree trunk as a Keebler, the Full House cookie guy.
Tastes real good with salt.
Yeah, I grew up riding bicycles, no helmets. Anybody remember that? I grew up in cars,
Sure.
big block motors, 400 horse motors, no seat belts.
Right.
Okay? What I think we need to do is everybody has to make their own individual decision as to whether they're going to get vaccinated or not. And we shouldn't hassle each other for that individual decision. I grew up on a dairy farm. I grew up eating dirt, worms, maggots, ants, all that good stuff. Swimming in a creek, in the cow pasture. You know, we need to get back to those old days, and we're worried about giving up our rights. But look at the food we buy in the store. It's full of GMOs. Okay? How many people get their water from the public distribution system? How many people are on community wells? Okay, you never know if that's been tampered with or not. I got my vaccination. I got the first one in July when my mom was here, and I got my second one, I think, in November. I work on the base. They come out and they say you have to do it, or you're going to lose your job. Okay, so I don't want to lose my job. I still got a lot of good years in me, so I got the vaccine. I'm a healthy guy. I take my magnesium, take my zinc, I take my vitamins, take multivitamins. I eat tons of fresh eggs every day, and eggs are just loaded with nutrition. You know, so like that's what I'm trying to say. We need to get back to the old days, eating homegrown food. If you can raise chickens, chickens are so easy to raise. You know, I'm not sure what everybody's home situation is, but if you can raise your own food and take care of yourselves that way, that's far and above any kind of medicine you can get. My grandparents, my grandfather and his brother, they were slogging up the boot to Italy during World War II. They left small town New York together, went over on the same ship, got separated, fought their time there, found each other on the same ship coming back.
Wow.
You know, and that's just amazing that they both made it. And I guarantee you, if they were alive today, hell no, they ain't taking no vaccine. You know? So we all have to make our own decision, and we shouldn't be hassling or heckling each other if you choose to, or if you choose not. You know? And I guarantee you, we're being told what we can, what we can't say. You can't yell fire in a movie theater. You know, and me working on the base, I can't say piss on Joe Biden, because there's certain guidelines that you have to follow. But I guarantee you that my family history and myself today, I will not give up my guns. Okay? And I will draw that line when the black SUVs pull up outside. That's gonna be the breaking point. I'm not gonna go downtown Wasilla or Washington DC carrying guns, I'm not gonna do that. And we should all, that should be the breaking point for everybody. When they come knocking on your door, saying, give us that, our country is done. We can handle this, and we'll get past it. Our country's been through a lot. But when they come knocking on the door, give us your guns, they mean business. So,
I think they mean business already.
I think so.
well, you're right. When they come take your guns, because the gun, our country has the largest civil army in the world. That's why we haven't been invaded. And that's why they don't do martial law. That's why they don't do that, because they know that there's veterans and true-blooded Americans that will say no. That's the line. So God bless you all. I'm glad we're here. I wish Murkowski and those people were here. But Murkowski's her days, as far as I believe, her days are numbered.
That'd be good.
So.
Okay, Jennifer, I think you had an announcement you wanted to make.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Jennifer Eastman, and I just wanted to share briefly with the group. I am a trained microbiologist. I have my doctorate in microbiology and have worked off and on in public health for a little over 10 years in multiple states. And throughout my history, I've always kind of heard on the fringes from folks that I worked with that, man, if only we could get vaccine mandates, we could fix all of these problems. And as the pandemic was rolling out and they started talking in summer of 2020 about, oh, we'll have a vaccine by the end of the year, I remarked to my husband, I said, you know, the way everyone's been terrified about this is the golden opportunity for them to enforce and put into place vaccine mandates. I was like, just watch, they're going to try to do that. I said, I hope I'm wrong, but I'm pretty much guarantee we're going to see this attempted. And as a result of that concern, some friends and I started a statewide petition opposing the COVID-19 vaccine mandates. So we've got that out there. We've been circulating it around the state. We have thousands of folks across the state that have signed it. And it's been, I think almost most major communities have some folks out there passing it around. Our goal is to get every Alaskan to have the opportunity to sign the petition. It's not a petition opposing the vaccine. We think that everyone should have to choose whether or not to take the vaccine. It is strictly opposing a mandate coercing or forcing people to look at their jobs, their education, their ability to travel, or lose those rights as a result of a vaccine mandate. Right now there are some bills in Congress looking at mandating the vaccine for air travel, as we've heard. And yeah, my next concern, people talks over this already, and now they've approved the vaccine for emergency use for the kids. And I have grave concerns that they've gotten away with it so long, they're going to start mandating it for kids shortly. California already has legislation in place to start requiring it for all kids eligible to attend school. I don't think it's this current school year. I believe it's starting in September 2022. And as a microbiologist, we haven't finished all of the safety data and the research on that. And so my concern, what if they're wrong? I mean, we used to would say, you know, well, let's be reserved about your health, and that would be the prudent response. And now we're being labeled, I mean, Merriam-Webster just redefined the word anti-vaxxer as anyone who's opposed to vaccines or a mandate. I've had more vaccines than probably most of the people in this room as a result of my work. But I volunteered and chose to have those vaccines. I wasn't forced to lose my job working in a lab if I didn't get them. This whole thing is very frightening, and the legislature and the governor may have said some nice things, but they have done nothing to help us. The governor now is trying to, you know, make nice and say some nice things, but even his executive orders have language in them to say, well, to the extent allowed by the law, by federal law, we'll prevent enforcing these mandates. And his quote in November, he has said that he will not, well, in October he said that he will not do anything to oppose the mandates outright.
And then in November, as he stated his executive order to not use state resources to enforce mandates, he said, just as I don't believe the government can order a private business to require vaccines, I also don't believe that government should keep private businesses from requiring a vaccination if they think it is the best for their employees or their customers. So that's what we're working with. I encourage everyone to sign the petition. And if you know other people to sign, I have petitions you can take out and have friends to sign so we can get back. Our group will be letting people know of legislation as it passes through Juneau. We're sending all of the signatures to the governor's office and the state legislature to let them know how people feel on this issue. And we'll be keeping folks updated as legislation comes to pass in the upcoming session to know when to get involved and contact their legislators on this. So I appreciate your support.
I have a question for you, if I may.
Yes, sir.
Since you're a microbiologist, then you must agree that these masks absolutely do not work.
I can
You
tell
know
you
that.
that we do not use surgical masks to protect ourselves in laboratory work.
Ma'am, I've helped run a small laboratory for ESC in Anchorage years ago. The N9s or none of those masks work. You know as a microbiologist that those bugs are so small they go right through. It's just exactly like putting up a chain link fence to stop mosquitoes. It doesn't work. It's a false sense of security. Not only that, I've overseen decontamination areas. And you have decontamination procedures. And if you don't know those procedures, it doesn't matter what apparatus you wear, whether it's a PAPR or supplied air, you'll contaminate. You're a microbiologist, don't you?
Yep, I've worked in biosafety level 3 labs.
So I'd like to see, if you have this thing for the vaccine, there should be one for masks. They absolutely do not work, and they spread the disease farther, faster. That's a fact, right there.
Well, maybe a need for a group you can start to do that.
So,
You're the representatives. We pay you to do your job. Why don't you do that job? Huh? Why should I? I mean, really? We wouldn't even be in this situation if you representatives did your job right. That's a fact.
Do either of you have any?
Yeah, is there anybody else that wants to
Okay,
talk first?
anybody else? I think we're getting ready to wrap up, but if there's anybody that has a last minute, quick thing.
one thing,
Oh.
just one, real short.
Real quick.
You absolutely cannot run a scam without suckers.
It's a very unsuccessful scam, Chris. You won't make very much money.
Okay, well, thank you all so much for coming out and sharing your stories. I think that the representatives have a quick wrap up, and then we can head out for the night.
All right. Thank you each for being here. You know, one of the reasons that these kind of events are necessary, in my opinion, is because we are dealing not just with science, we're dealing not just with medicine here, we're dealing with political truths. And just like Kirsten was talking about, you have, two kinds of truths. You have truth, you all have an idea what that is, then you have a layer on top of that, which is the political truth. And that is the truths that you will be rewarded for agreeing to, maybe punished for not agreeing to. And you can see that most painfully illustrated in totalitarian regimes, communist regimes. And, there's some books that have been written talking about, they were lying to us, knew they were lying to us, they knew they were lying to us. So that was the mentality in the Soviet Union, for example. And so dealing with and come to grips with understanding how to respond to these political truths is something new for a lot of Americans. And there's a lot of confusion, and there's a lot of unhelpful information from all sorts of sources, official and unofficial, and all areas in between. And I think one of the most important things that we can be doing as Alaskans, as Americans right now, is being very discerning. and discriminating in who you trust, who has good information on a particular topic. I haven't found any sources about current events that are right all the time about everything. So find, someone who can speak intelligently with credibility about, something that you care about. And when you find them, hold on to them and spread the word and help the rest of us to know what you found. If our public institutions had credibility and could do that, we wouldn't be in this mess. We're here today because some of those institutions have spent their credibility. And certainly some of the public health institutions that we've been watching over the last 2 years have spent their credibility. Some of the newspapers that used to have some credibility, well, it's been it's gone. It's not there anymore. And the question is, now what? And unfortunately, when you have a form of self-government like we've experienced in this country for many, many years, that's based on consent, which requires credibility from our leaders, from our institutions, and you begin to lose that, many of those institutions look for another model. We don't need consent anymore. The leader of the State House was publicly making statements here not too long ago, talking about the fact that, well, we're going to do these policies whether the people of Alaska consent or not. And so that it illustrates a departure from that model. And as we go further and further away from that model, you get closer and closer to what we would refer to as totalitarianism, where there is no consent needed, and sometimes they don't even pretend. Sometimes they pretend, sometimes they don't. But that is the trajectory that we are on as a state, as a country right now, as a society. And if we aren't discerning, and we aren't discriminating in where we get our information and how we communicate with others, then that trajectory is likely to continue. And honestly, I try and take a step back sometimes and look at what's the bigger picture. Part of the bigger picture that I see is that it's really not about the vaccines. It could be some new political truth that raw milk's bad for you, and anybody that drinks it's bad for society, and we need to ban raw milk, and we need to make sure that nobody drinks it. We need to make sure that foster parents who give some kind of raw milk to their kids get banned from foster care, and right on down the line, whatever it is, whether it's a vaccine or something like that, or maybe something else you can come up with. And you're going to find in that scenario, there are some people, communities, religious beliefs that, raw milk is really important to them. And so they will become the unwanted, the unwelcome in society, and you'll see all sorts of messaging, talking about, how they're a threat, not unlike, what the Germans were doing with the Jews and others in their time. There's a documentary on YouTube talks about what the nurses were doing and saying to, in many cases, the poor families in Germany in the early days of the Nazis, where they would, literally tell the parents of poor kids, hey, we're going to give, your kids better medical care than they could get. You need to entrust it to us. And they would kill them. And they did it systematically. They did it in large numbers. And that was, up to that time, the best medical, care system in the world. I mean, there was a time where, as an American doctor, you want to prove that you're a real good doctor. You say, I studied in Germany. Hands down, they were thought to be the best. Very well educated, very intelligent, had a constitutional form of government up until they declared by emergency rule that they weren't going to follow it anymore. Happened there. It could happen here. I hope and pray that it doesn't. But a part of my role as a legislator is to see that it doesn't, to advocate on your behalf, to advocate for your rights, to be a source of hopefully accurate information to the best extent that I can. And so that's partly why I'm here, to hear and listen and know what's going on, because, you know, it's not any easier for me because I'm elected to know what the truth is. It's just as hard to figure out what's accurate, what's inaccurate, and so forth. So I really appreciate you coming here to share with the group and with us as legislators. Look forward to chatting with some of you after the event is over as well. Thank you.
I want to thank you all for coming tonight. I think it's important to come and hear from the people who we work for. So I appreciate you coming and sharing your stories. I want to share a little bit of one of my stories. Back in November, my 39-year-old cousin died from COVID. He was not in the best shape. He was overweight. But he left behind 2 young kids, a young wife. And when it first happened, I felt shocked. I didn't even know he was sick. I felt guilty, really guilty, because I had gone to the early treatment summit. I'd heard from the medical experts that had a whole plethora of early treatments that you could do, and I had been using my platform as a legislator to push it. And I got really angry because those we've entrusted in the healthcare community, those like Dr. Ann Zink, who's our state medical director, are on to a monolithic mantra of it's a jab or else. There's no such thing as early treatment. And I'm still angry. This is mostly just sad, but I'm angry. I want to give a quick update on the status of the fight in Juneau for healthcare freedom. A lot of noise going around. I want to set the stage for what to expect going forward in this next session in January, or hopefully we can achieve in January. So, and this is due to in part to folks like you. We contacted your legislator, emailed, called, demanded action. It was, I believe, in September. We were in the 3rd special session. We were on. It was Sunday. It was one of the last days of the special session, and the governor had a telehealth bill that had made its way to the floor. It had already passed the Senate. In the Senate, they had put some vaccine freedom items in the bill. It got stripped out in the House Health Committee. It made it to the floor, and we had a number of amendments. One of the first amendments that passed was from Representative Sarah Vance that said, you go to the hospital, you have the right to have an advocate there with you, a family member, somebody with you. But something we shouldn't even have to put in statute. It's just kind of obvious. But the hospitals are denying it. We've been hearing tonight really tragic stuff and horrific stuff. And of course, who could vote against that amendment? The amendment passed with 16 members of the 40-member House voting no. We then proceeded to some other amendments. One of the amendments was mine. It would have guaranteed that in our non-discrimination statutes that you could not be discriminated against because of your vaccine status with COVID-19. It was not something you'd be allowed to discriminate against you for, whether it's hiring or buying food in the grocery store or whatnot, flying. That amendment failed on a tie vote. We had 2 Republican members of the minority that were absent. They were flying in that evening. If we would have been able to continue, we would have passed some healthcare freedom amendments in the House. Representative Eastman at 6 to 10 in the hopper, ready to go. We were going to consider next. And Eastman and several other Democrat members stood up, and it wasn't just the Democrats either. Stood up and said, well, you know, the the hospital lobby was not really happy with what had happened to the bill. And so we needed to pull it from the floor to put it in the Rules Committee to continue working on it. Which is, in political speak, means we're going to kill the bill and we don't want to vote on it. And because we don't want to go on record. And so a majority vote happened and they pulled the bill from the floor before we could vote on any more amendments. And it got shoved to the Rules Committee and never been seen from again. And you go back and look and you see that a significant number of those who voted to do that had received donations from the hospital lobby. So I can't make aspersions about bribery, but come to your conclusion. So that's the status, and what I want to tell you is, earlier in the year, we had less progress on vaccine freedom. We were farther away from passing something. But because of your engagement, because of those petitions that people were signing and sending into Juneau, because constituents were calling up and yelling at their legislator and saying, protect my healthcare freedom, because you were emailing us and demanding action, we had people coming across the aisle, and it wasn't really, it's turned into a partisan issue, but really it's not, it's a nonpartisan issue. Coming across the aisle of healthcare freedom and joining us and voting in that way. And we were making progress. The majority was losing control of the situation. I don't know what's going to happen this next session, but if you continue to keep the pressure up, I believe we can win. You know, sometimes you engage in political fights because it's the right thing to do, and you need to get somebody on record so you can know where you stand. In this situation, we actually have a shot of passing something. And a lot of fights, I couldn't say that. But in this situation, I think we actually have a shot of passing something. Getting to the floor is difficult, but once we have something on the floor, amending it to put in some kind of healthcare vaccine freedom for you to choose whether or not you want to get the jab, we have that opportunity. And that's what I shared the other night, and I want to, it has to do with the real nature of politics. Most politicians, very few, this is not the case, most all politicians make decisions based upon fear. They don't ask what they're doing, whether what they're doing is constitutional, even though they have an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution. They don't ask if it's good policy. They mostly ask, who are we going to make happy? Who are we going to offend? Not the way I approach things, but that's most folks in the legislature, most politicians. And so the question you have to ask yourself, are the politicians in Juneau more afraid of what we're going to do with their political career, of what you're going to do with their political career, doing the wrong thing, or are they more afraid of the hospital lobby? And right now, I think more of them are more afraid of the hospital lobby.
That's right.
But that can change. So I want to encourage you. Your voice matters. It makes a huge difference. And don't shut up. And thank you for coming.
Thank you, my
Okay,
fellow
well, thank
Alaskans.
you, everybody. We are officially, and there's still some snacks. Feel free to grab on your way out and stay around and chat if you want to as well.
Hi, my fellow Alaskans. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight. I'm sorry for the snap food there. There was no plug-in anywhere near me. I completely had to rearrange things and move the equipment to the other end of the house, and then start connecting cameras that weren't connected before to get everything back up and running again. I hope the last part of the broadcast went well. I have no clue. I had no way to monitor anymore. I ended up taking my phone and throwing it into the mix as one of the cameras to make this episode or this broadcast possible for all of you guys today. Another flawless learning lesson of things not to do and things to do when I go do live streams. So again, really do appreciate you guys all tuning in here today. Just to emphasize, Politadick is not responsible for anything or any of the content that was said here today. We are just here to live stream it uncut and unfiltered, just so that people are very aware that any views or expressions that were expressed here today, they are solely the person's of their own violation, nothing with Politadick. Thank you all again, once again, for tuning in. Make sure you like and share. Go to my website, politadick.com. Click that support button. All donations go right back into continuing to improve the equipment that I'm using, improve the broadcast. There, you can find this on Politadick and Politadick Unfiltered today. I did not stream this to YouTube or Twitter. Their policies would have flagged this video in about 2 seconds flat. So I wanted to make sure that I reached the largest audience that I possibly could without getting myself shut off of the platforms. And I figured Facebook would be the only one that would allow me to do it. So I'm taking a chance. Thank you all again for tuning in. Go to my website, politadick.com, and click that button for support. All proceeds go right back into upgrading our equipment and making sure we break the news to you unfiltered and live. Have a great night.
really wanted a solution here. We have a whole bunch of legislators